August 14th, 1813. She came of good English stock. Her forefathers came across the ocean on the ship Abigail in 1628. Brothers William, Ralph, and Richard were founders of the city of Charleston, Massachusetts in 1638. They were persons of character, substance, enterprise, excellent citizens, public benefactors, as were many of their descendants. Abigail's father, her mother, brother Ishtar, and wife, brother Henry, and Abigail's husband, Hale Bradford, joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 1838. They moved to Nauvoo, Hancock County, where Hale bought a farm and later purchased another one adjoining it. On one occasion, Hale and Abigail were taking their son Rosal to a doctor. They met the prophet Joseph Smith. The son's hand was injured and they feared it would have to be amputated. The prophet looked at it, told them to return home, that everything would be okay. It was. Hale and Abigail both received their patriarchal blessings under the hand of the patriarch Hiram Smith. She was promised that her name would be perpetuated, that she would be honored by posterity, and the blessings would rest upon her descendants. She would be blessed in basket and in store, and would gain a knowledge of God and His mysteries that would be a comfort to her in time of need. Little did she know that soon after that, she would have to be comforted. As she was on the delivery bed with one of her children, her husband went to get a sister-in-law to assist her in the birth, and when he came back, he died within 24 hours. 24 hours later, their 8-year-old son died, and when she was well enough to sit up and sit at the meal table, there were 2 empty chairs. She joined the church, Abigail and her children spent the winter at winter quarters in 1846, and in June of 1847, her and 5 children traveled with Bishop Hunter's company, in which Archibald Gardner was the captain of that company. During that journey to Salt Lake, one oxen died, so they hooked up their milk cow to the team, and they would milk the cow, put the butter in a churn, and put it in the wagon, and by nightfall, they would have butter for the next day. Upon reaching the Valley of Salt Lake, they located in the old fort. The children, Marianne and Razzle, helped make adobes for their first home in the valley. Archibald Gardner had been associated with them all the way across the plain, and he asked Brigham Young if he could marry Marianne Bradford, who was the oldest son of Abigail. The prophet said, "You can't marry the daughter until you marry the mother. The mother has to be taken care of." So he married Abigail, and the same day he married Marianne. Abigail gave birth to her only daughter, which she named Abigail, and that is my great-grandmother. One of the things that Abigail Gardner did was to learn the Indian language, and she was influential in helping settle many of the problems that they had with the Indians in southern Utah. It's been my pleasure to be a gardener, and not until 2 years ago did I know how important the gardeners were when I met Archibald and his many wives at the Gardner Mill in Salt Lake City. I grew up with knowing I was a gardener, but had forgot who he was until 2 years ago when I met Nancy Long and Chris Christensen. Now I know he was a great man. He's got a great posterity, and I'm glad to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. We appreciate that. And while Delilah Abbott, who is the great-granddaughter of Mary Ann Bradford, is coming up, you may be interested to know she's the author of the book, Days of Our Fathers, which so many of you may have.
Even in early polygamous Utah, it isn't often that a man marries mother and daughter the same day, but that's what happened to me. I'm Mary Ann Bradford Gardner, first child of Abigail Sprague and Hal Bradford. I was born November 7th, 1831 in Cotton Township, southeast Indiana. In 1838, my parents joined the LDS Church, and in 1840 moved to Nauvoo. Father bought 80 acres of rich, fertile land 6 miles below the city and near the Mississippi River. But there was persecution. In 1845, with Mother clinging to life following a difficult childbirth, and my brothers and sisters all sick with chills and fever, Father went for help. On his way, he suffered what we thought was a stroke and died that night. I was the only one who wasn't sick, so did all the housework, the chores, tended the sick, and Grandpa and Grandma. I was only 14, and it kept me jumping. 2 of my Bradford uncles tried to persuade Mother to let them care for and educate us children if she would just give up this new religion. She flatly refused. She sold or traded away our farm and everything for 2 not very good outfits, some seeds, and provisions. We spent that awful winter at winter quarters where Grandma died. In June 1847, our family started west as part of Archibald Gardner's company of 10. Archibald was large of stature, athletic, and with great physical endurance. He was 33 years old, generous, and of a pleasing appearance. I was 16. I couldn't help but admire him, the way he handled the company and the people assigned to him. I fell in love. I knew he was married and had a family, but love doesn't always go where it's told. He was always telling stories. Sometimes, around the campfires at night, he and Mother would see who could tell the tallest tales. He joined in the singing, but he couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. In 1848, the Bradfords planted wheat and corn as soon as we could. Then the crickets came and ate everything. We thank God for the beautiful gray and white gulls that came and ate them. With that plague over, we irrigated, replanted, and raised enough grain to supply us with bread for a year. That fall, we moved to Mill Creek. In the summer of 1848, Brigham Young told Archie to go into polygamy. It was then that Archie looked at me, really looked at me, and proposed. I accepted gladly. President Young told Archie he'd found a fair one, meaning me, and then began to ask questions about Mother. She was having a hard time, and with me gone, it would be even harder. Archie, Brigham Young said, your shoulders are broad. You must help bear the burden. Bring in Abigail, and I'll marry you to both her and Mary Ann at the same time. Archie and I were stunned, but as head of our church, he was to be obeyed. Archie married Mother and me on April 26, 1849. Archie was getting timber out of Mill Creek Canyon for his lumber mills. I went with him to cook for his men. Money was scarce, so in addition to cooking, I hauled logs 6 miles from the head of the canyon down to one of his mills. I drove 2 yoke of oxen, hitched to carts, heaped with logs. 9 months later, our first child, a daughter, was born. In all, we had 9 children. We lost 3 of them. At the time of Johnson's army, I went to Spanish Fork with the rest of the Gardners. There was no war, so I moved to West Jordan, where Archie built me a house west of the grist mill he was building. I cooked for the men, and also when he built the rock meeting house. Early in our marriage, I told him romantically that I'd keep a candle burning in my window so he could always find his way back to me. We laughed about it, but it became our secret, our tradition. When he could be with us, I cooked the foods he liked, and when he'd pull in, I'd run out to help unhitch and put the animals up for the night. Archie and I were happy together.
This is going to be done by Nancy Long Christensen, who has restored the West Jordan Mill so beautifully, has come to know the Gardner history, and I know of no one better to represent Elizabeth Lewis than Nancy Long.
Hi, Archie. Ah, 'tis 1853, and take a look at me. A breath of fresh air, no sign of despair. I sing so sweetly and smile so discreetly. I catch Archie's eye and ear. I'm scared to death. With my song. And his wife I'll soon become, but not for long. My voice is like a meadowlark, and Archie's heart melted when he heard my song, and he asked me to wed, and we did, but not for long. Did Margaret approve me? She did not. So Brigham's word of yes was sought. Brigham told Archie to take my hand and teach me the values of this wonderful land. Brigham said I'd mellow and change my ways, and that I'd gain a testimony after many days. My sisters had a hard time accepting me. Why, oh why, I was busy as a bee. Babies were never my delight, and about my drinking was many a fight. When Sister Mary Ann went to heaven, leaving a brood of 6, Archie asked if I'd raise them as if they were mine. At first, what a fix. But I cooked, loved, and tended, and 6 years ended, and I knew they would all survive. And then I left the home and valley so I could feel alive. Archie found me in Bingham one night, dancing and singing my song. One look at his face, and I knew disgrace, and the marriage was long gone. I was in California with my 8th grandchild was born last week, and I do have children. I have 6 children and 8 grandchildren, and 1 more on the way. And I was in bed, and Ballard asked me to represent Liz, and honestly, it was amazing. I was in bed, and I thought, what am I going to say? And I thought, I'll write a poem. I've never written a poem in my life. I walked in and found some recipe cards in her kitchen, and I just wrote that in 2 seconds. It just came off my head. Maybe I've been inspired by the Gardner family. I love you all so much. Thank you.
And I can just imagine that was probably typical of Elizabeth Lewis. The next wife was Laura Althea Thompson. Deanne Gardner Vanderford is going to, a great-granddaughter is going to tell us about her.
I hope I can do a good job for all of the children of Laura Althea. I'm deeply grateful for this, and we love her a great deal. She was born in Alexander, New York in 1834. She was the daughter of Lord George and Lucia Thompson, and they joined the church and they came across the plains, arriving in Utah in 1850, and she was only 16 going on 17, settling in Cottonwood. But at that time, she was a teacher. Well, Archie heard that this school teacher was really a good teacher, and he also heard she was young. But he decided to drop off the firewood and get acquainted. But what really surprised him was her maturity. She had been, for a woman, and this is interesting, for a woman, her education was extensive. And he, whose formal education had been very meager, not been able, had the opportunity, was really drawn to this woman. She was a tall, trim woman with deep set eyes of gray, dark hair, combed down the middle, parted in the middle, and drawn severely back, but it didn't make her look hard, or prim. It revealed very feminine, delicate features, and, quote, in this wonderful book by the two Delilahs, I thank you, a high degree of intelligence. Well, Archie left a lot of wood that year, and they did get acquainted, and finally they married. She was 17 by then, and he was 37, and they were to be the parents of 11 children, and I will only take 5 minutes, even though there are 11 children. Okay, 8 sons and 3 daughters. There were a lot of sad times for Laura Althea. Of the 11 children, and there was also Fanny, an Indian girl that lived with them for 16 years and is buried with them in Salt Lake. Of the 11 children, 2 babies, Clinton Albert Hiram died at 6 months. Perry Wilburn died at 15 months. The real heartbreakers, they were all heartbreakers. Archibald, the namesake, 18 years old, killed. A boiler exploded in one of the mills. He was killed. 10 days later, she went into labor, premature labor, and had this last baby that died 15 months later. 3 months later, her namesake, Laura Althea, dies of brain fever at 13. So of the 11 children, 5 died in childhood, 6 married. George DeLoss married Eugenia Huffager. Lucy Adele came here, married Brigham Gardner, lived here, came with Archibald. Joseph Smith married Huffager, Ariadne Huffager. Aunt Nettie, married Ira Benyon. Brigham Osro, my grandpa, married Emma Eunice Michelson, lived here in Star Valley. Wallace Ward married Nellie Eggleston. I know you're all descendants. Only 3 of these 11 children lived past the age of 49. She went to Spanish Fork for a while, Laura Althea did, and she ran a small store. And one interesting event was when a squaw came in hiding from her husband, and her husband was drunk. He caught her, and the next day she came, and he had cut off her nose with his tomahawk in his drunken rage. She spent a lot of time, she and Archie, talking about politics, economy, different things around the table. She served almost 20 years in the Relief Society presidencies. She was given a farm. He built her a brick home. And as was told this morning, she came to Star Valley with 3 sons, and her daughter was already here. Lucy Adele was already here. The other 2 sons went back and helped their mother, Wallace and Joseph. Uncle Oz, Grandpa Oz, stayed here in Star Valley, made it his home. She was troubled with a cough a great deal of her life. There was a lot of problem in the Salt Lake area, and she just didn't get over it. So Grandpa Oz said, come on up to Star Valley where there's good, clean, fresh air. I think it's that smelter down there that's getting to you, and you're not getting better. So in the spring, in the summer of 1899, she came to Star Valley. She didn't get any better. The trip was very hard on her. And she died here. But I want you to tell you just one thing she said before she died. Grandpa Oz was with her, and she said, I don't feel bad about it. We all have to go sometime. And you will find that death gets easier when you get older. We don't know what she felt, what she liked, but we know what she did. And so we know what she felt and what she was like. Her thoughts are revealed in the way she continued after death, after death, after trial, and they all did. She endured. She edified, she persevered and perfected herself. She was always a teacher, whether she got paid for it or not. She loved all the children. All of the wives' children came to the home. They never knew whose children were who, but she loved the children, sacrificed and served. Closing, we honor you, Laura Althea Thompson Gardner, and we know you're not far from here today, and we love you, great-grandmother to so many, and beloved daughter of God. Thank you.
Thank you, Deanne. The next wife was Jane Park. And while Judy Wright is coming up, who was a great-great-granddaughter,
Jane Park was the daughter of David at Ann Brooks Park, and she was born in Warwick, Kent County, Canada. Now, this is where Archibald had settled himself, and eventually his family came there. They were all there together. In fact, the Hamiltons were there too. When Archibald crossed on the ice, a little while later, the Hamilton family, his Gardner family, including his father, and the Park family came to join him. In the spring of '47, Archibald left, along with the Hamilton family, and the Bradford family were in the party, but the Park family had to stay behind. In order to leave, you had to have either a lot of horses to pull that wagon, or you had to be able to afford oxen. The Park family couldn't afford the prairie schooner, the oxen, and 15 months worth of supplies. The 15 months worth of supplies were because you had 3 months crossing the plains. By the time you got there, there was no time to grow food. So you had to have your year's supply with you. Sound familiar? All right, in 1850, 3 years later, the Park family came with some freighters to the Salt Lake Valley. They settled in Big Cottonwood by the Gardners and the Hamiltons. Because times were really rough, and you'll note that many of these women worked out of the home. At age 16, Jane Park worked for Margaret Livingston Gardner and Archibald in their home. Margaret had just had Mary Ellen, and Jane came for a couple of years, actually, to help Margaret out. Jane had learned to sew very well from her mother, and what she would do is she'd ration herself one candle, and at night she would sew a dress by hand until the candle was completely gone. She'd take the dress to bed with her, and then the morning light, the minute it hit her window, she was up and she sewed in bed. That way she made one dress by hand per day. I don't know how she did it. I can't do it with the sewing machine. By the way, she had the second sewing machine in the Salt Lake Valley. She was also good at quilting and ended up quilting the majority of her life. When she was 18, she married Archibald Gardner. When she was 19, she had her first son, Reuben, only son as well. And then 2 years later, at age 21, she had Anne Emerette. All of her relatives come from Anne. Reuben never married, so all of us are actually not only Gardners, but we're Egberts. I'll tell you one story, a quick one about Archie. Normal children always are asking Mom and Dad, can't you have another baby? Especially when Anne Emerette kept singing, all the other wives have children. Archie finally, to get her off of everybody's back, said, the way you get babies is you find them under the sagebrush out in the desert, and if you go real early in the morning, I'll bet you'll find one. And Anne spent an awful lot of time out in the desert after that looking for a baby to take home to her mother. Aunt Jane's health was never good. but she lived till age 82. Along with her health not being good, she was a very hard worker. Whenever there was a wedding dress to make, temple clothes, burial clothes, Jane was directly involved for the entire family. Burial clothes were always last-minute things. Nobody normally planned on someone in the family dying. Jane also was an excellent cook and had a great reputation. Archibald always took her up to the mills during the summer, up the canyon, to cook for all the men. Jane had many, many abilities, but she never had the ability to say no. Eventually, this was telling on her. Jane was a very quiet person. I'm going to assume a little shy. She never told anyone her troubles and never told anyone that she just simply was overloaded and couldn't do all the extra things that people would ask. She just was very, very accommodating. About the summer of 1864, Margaret came to the house and Jane was crying. This is right before Archibald was going to pick her up to take her up to the mill. Jane was not crying normally. Jane couldn't stop crying. Margaret took her home, and Jane stayed with Margaret for about 3 months. At this point in time, Jane slept for about a week when she finally stopped crying. And Margaret took care of her. Margaret didn't let anybody get near her that wanted anything. Jane could get up when she wanted to. She could do whatever she wanted to. She could lay in the swing. She could go walk in the fields. And after about 3 months, the breakdown was over, and Jane could get back to her normal life, and she returned home. Jane had a very close relationship with her children, and when Anne got married, she could hardly stay away from her mother and was there every afternoon. Later on, Jane had the opportunity to return Margaret's kindness. One thing that impressed me about these women is that they did love one another and helped each other out. Margaret, after she had one of her many strokes and was completely debilitated, came to live with Jane in her new home that Reuben had helped Archibald build for her. But it wasn't just Margaret. It was Delilah, the youngest daughter, Artie and Allie, and many other people that Margaret graciously had taken into her home. She stayed there with Jane until her death in 1893. Jane developed what was called dropsy, where your body fills up with fluid. It's a heart condition. And she died on June 27th, 1916. Reuben never married. And all of us relatives come from her daughter, Anne Emerette. Jane was a wonderful person. And like all of the women that you will hear about today, was a great pioneer woman. And I'm very proud to be one of her descendants. Thanks.
The next wife was Serena Garson Evenson, and this is going to be told by Lavinia Koenig, her great-granddaughter.
When the story of Roots by Alex Haley hit the nation and stirred up a renewed interest in heritage, the story of the Roots would never have been told had it not been for the grandmothers and aunts who acted as walking encyclopedias and passed the story of their African roots on to each generation. I realized then that my mother and grandmother had been on the right track. Whenever I asked my mother to tell me a story, she would often tell me of Serena Evenson Gardner, who had lived in Norway and who was the first woman in Norway to join the Mormon Church. She and her husband were the first couple to be baptized. They planned to leave for Utah, but unfortunately, he was lost at sea. Serena was determined to go to Utah anyway, and she and her 4 children left Norway on a cold December day. I was so sad when my mother would tell me that little Marie, the youngest daughter, became ill and died. She was wrapped in sheeting and placed on a weighted plank and buried at sea. Once Serena and the remaining children arrived in America and were preparing to join a wagon train west, Serena found it necessary to leave some of her most priceless possessions. Particularly was she sad at leaving her lovely down quilts.
She walked most of the way across the plains. One small son was pinned under an overturned wagon, but was miraculously survived. Upon arriving in Salt Lake City, she was employed in the household of Daniel H. Wells. Then a Mr. Thomas Wimmer offered her a small room in which to live. She spun yarn at no cost to earn a living. During that winter, a Mr. Gardner left sacks of flour on her doorstep. Eventually, Mr. Gardner and Serena became friends and were married in February 1856. One of Mr. Gardner's wives, Althea Thompson, was a teacher, and Serena asked to attend her classes so that she could learn to read and write English. Being educated meant so much to her. As a young girl in Norway, she had avidly followed the school teacher as far as she could walk as he traveled from home to home. So hungry was she for learning. Later, she asked a priest in Resor if she could study with him and his pupils, which she did, and later received recognition for her academic achievements. She taught her children to read and write and do arithmetic. She read to them. All her children were very literate, even though they did not have a formal education. My grandmother, Serena, used to tell me that her mother's favorite accomplishment was to figure in her head. After her daughter, Regina Evenson, married Archibald's son, Neil, and they moved to Spanish Fork, where Archibald was building a mill. Serena moved there along with other wives. They were a happy family, and my grandmother often expressed her love for all her brothers and sisters. She told me she was a very lucky girl. She and her brothers and sisters had shoes when others did not, and she even had 5 cents worth of candy once, an unheard luxury. Serena Evenson Gardner eventually settled in Leland, Utah, near the second mill that Archibald built in the area. She was contented raising her family, acquiring land, going into town twice a week, walking 2 miles each way to sell her butter and eggs. She did this until she was 80 years old. Serena Evenson Gardner died in January 1911 and is buried in the Spanish Fork Cemetery near her 2 bachelor Evenson sons and her daughter Regina and her son-in-law Neil. I have been so surprised and touched by the pride and love shown by her many great-grandchildren who have contributed to this report, and I thank all of you for your valued input. Serena and Archibald Gardner had 4 children: Henry Gardner, a prominent state senator, and the twins, the first twins in Spanish Fork, Cyrenus and Serena Gardner Andrus, and Annie Gardner Francis. There were 43 grandchildren, 3 of them still living, all sisters, daughter of Annie and Joseph Francis, Verda Tuckett, Lenore Meesom, and Rose Anderson. There are 191 great-grandchildren and 739 great-great-grandchildren and 1,682 great-great-great-grandchildren, with a grand total of 2,717 descendants. All honorable, educated, hard-working, proud citizens. Mothers and fathers, tell your children the stories of their ancestors. Bring these histories to life. Give your children the confidence of a noteworthy inheritance.
Very good. We appreciate that. The next wife was Sarah Jane Hamilton, and Virginia Black, a great-granddaughter, will be giving us that summary.
Sarah Jane Hamilton was the daughter of James Lang and Mary Ann Campbell Hamilton. She was born in Goodrich, Canada, June 11, 1842. She moved to Nauvoo with her family when she was 5 years old, but when the Saints were expelled from the state, she traveled west with them. The Hamiltons arrived in Salt Lake City October the 6th, 1852, and they spent the first days of being in the valley with the family of William Gardner. She became very proficient in all the pioneer homemaking skills. She was large of stature, 6 feet tall. She married Archibald Gardner June the 17th in Brigham Young's office, the 8th of his 11 wives. James H. Gardner was the only child born to this union. He was born in the house near the mill on the Big Cottonwood. Not long after he was born, they separated and their marriage was annulled. She married Samuel L. Howard, and to this union, 9 children were born. All through her life, she was an active church worker. She was thrifty and industrious, and a splendid cook. I read that. Sarah Jane died at Riverton, Utah, March the 16th, 1924, at the age of 81 years. I was happy to study a little bit about Sarah Jane, and I'll be happy to know her.
Appreciate that brief but very good description of Sarah Jane. The next wife was Harriet Armitage. Velma Thomas, a great-granddaughter, is going to give us a summary of her life. We appreciate her being here.
My sister, Mildred McWilliams, compiled this report, and then she wasn't able to come, so I'm just going to read what she wrote. Harriet Armitage was born in Yorkshire, England, February 13th, 1830, to Samuel and Fanny Armitage. At the age of 19, she was baptized into the church. She married Henry Nietzsche Larder. They had 1 daughter, 6 weeks old, when they sailed for America on the ship Ellen Maria on February 10th, 1852. The ship landed in New Orleans, Louisiana. They then went by steamer to St. Louis, Missouri. Their daughter passed away there at the age of 8 months and 15 days. They crossed the plains with the David Wilkins Company about June 1st, 1853, arriving in Salt Lake City about September 9th, 1853. They settled in the Mill Creek area. They had another daughter born in Salt Lake City, February 20th, 1855. She also passed away. Henry Larder left Harriet there, then to go to the California gold fields to seek his fortune. After quite a long time and not even knowing if Henry was still alive, Harriet divorced him. Harriet was rebaptized by Archibald Gardner and confirmed a member of the church on March 15th, 1857. She and Archibald were married right after that on June 17, 1857. They moved south to Spanish Fork, Utah with the rest of the saints when the Army moved into Utah. There were 2 children born to them, a girl, Lavinia, born April 1st, 1858, and a son, William, born April 6, 1860. He passed away at the age of 2 in 1862. After a few years, Henry Larder returned from California and persuaded Harriet to leave Archibald Gardner and return to him. So she divorced Archibald Gardner and remarried Henry. They moved to Moroni, Utah, taking Lavinia with them. They had 4 more children. Harriet passed away in 1866, and Lavinia was 8 years old at that time. She went back to live with her father, Archibald Gardner. She lived there until she was married. Aunt Jane raised her along with her family in West Jordan, Utah. Lavinia married Sidney Savage and had 5 children, losing all but 1. Sidney deserted her after a few years, and she later married Levi Naylor and had 4 more children, losing all but 2. She raised the 3 children. They were Harriet, Levitt, Laura Mace, and my mother, Viola Jeanette Naylor.
We appreciate that. We did not have that history in the original book on Archibald Gardner. The next wife is Elizabeth Dowding. She had no descendants, and I could not find anyone that knew a lot about Elizabeth Dowding. So all we can say today is that she was the 10th wife, and we don't have any history for her at this point. If any of you do have history, please send it to us. We would like to include it in the next book on Archibald Gardner. The 11th and the last wife of Archibald Gardner was Mary Larson. We're going to ask a granddaughter, Yvonne Clark, as we said this morning, the youngest living grandchild of Archibald, to give a summary of Mary Larson.
At Mary Larson Gardner's funeral on October 23, 1921, Apostle Melvin J. Ballard said, "This is one of God's noble women, one of the church's true pioneers. In marriage, she lived justly and well, one of God's greatest laws of sacrifice, rearing an honorable family under the severe physical hardships of early pioneer life. Her memory should be revered and cherished." When Mary was 7, Karen Hanson Larson and her mother and grandfather were baptized into the church. Persecution was intense. The young widow and her father were sometimes insulted and occasionally threatened. In 1859, they paid the price to come to Zion. On the long voyage, Karen married a Danish convert, Niels Heiselt. They joined a wagon train in Omaha. As the wagons were full of household goods, they walked all the way except across streams they could not wade. Mary, age 9, sometimes carried her younger brother piggyback short distances to encourage him. They arrived in Pleasant Grove September 15, 1859. There was no time to build a house, so they lived that winter in a dugout. It was a miserable shelter. Among other tedious tasks, Mary and her little brother herded cows and gleaned wool from bushes and fences for her mother to make clothing. As she grew to womanhood, she worked wherever she could to make a living. She cooked for mill hands in one of Archibald's mills, and at the age of 19 became his 11th and last wife. Mary cooked for mill hands and lived in several different homes, finally moving to West Jordan, where Bruce, Clarence, Dale, Roy, and Ed were born in the house by the mill. Lillian and Wilfred were born in an adobe house known as Aunt Jane's house. When Wilfred was about a year old, Archibald gave Mary a 45-acre farm on the bench and built her a white brick house. She was filled with joy and very proud of this new house and spent much of her time helping her young sons with the farm work. The oldest was 11. Franklin, the youngest, my father, was born in this new brick house. He was Mary's 8th child. She was 38. And Archibald's 48th child. He was 74. 2 years later, President Woodruff advised Archibald to take his youngest family to Star Valley. As was said this morning, that was a terrible sacrifice for Mary to leave her beautiful new home, but she did. Inasmuch as Mary died 69 years ago, those who remember her with any clarity are few in number. Those I talked to remember a short, somewhat stout, neatly dressed woman who was pleasant, friendly, a bit domineering, and hardworking. She was an excellent cook and particular housekeeper. They remembered that she always attended church and that she bore her testimony frequently with moving conviction. They remember her lovely vegetable garden. Milford remembers harnessing Old Deck to the buggy and driving his grandmother to get groceries, to visit friends, to visit the sick and those in need. All I interviewed said that Mary Larson had a great influence upon her family. Her married sons would go to see their mother every morning before they went to work. Marion Flukiger remembers that as a little girl she sat in Grandma's clean kitchen and listened to them as they talked. All her sons gathered around her, laughing and talking together. Her happy sense of humor and her unselfish devotion made them turn to her as a friend and advisor. All remember that Mary had many friends. Jen said that Mary's schedule was work in the morning, dinner promptly at noon, in the afternoon dress up in a fine dress with a bit of lace, pin on a brooch, and be ready to receive company. Mary loved pretty things and had a knack for making things attractive. This elegant lady, basking in the joy of grown children living close by, attentive grandchildren, warmth of friends, The joy of church service was the hostess to the Gardner reunion held in Star Valley in 1912. In her welcome address to a large crowd, Mary said, "I have never seen a day when I regretted marrying Bishop Gardner." This statement sums up her devotion, unselfishness, and faith of a truly great woman, and silences once and for all those who ask, how could an attractive 19-year-old girl have married a polygamist 36 years her senior?
Next, we will have the pleasure of hearing a song especially written for this reunion and sung by Deanne Gardner Vanderford. We do appreciate all the work that she has gone to provide music and accompaniment for this program.
We're different in our boundaries, we're different in our looks, we're different in the clothes we wear or what we like in books. But with all our difference, it makes no significance. When we get together, we're one family. Oh, we're different, but we're together. Yes, we're different, doesn't matter whether we're Margarets or Abigails or Mariannes or Laura Altheas. When we get together, we're one family. We're different in the way we talk, we're different in our style, we're different in the songs we sing or how we wear a smile. But with all our difference, it makes no significance. When we get together, we're one family. Clap. Oh, we're different, but we're one family. Oh, we're different, but we're one family. Doesn't matter whether we're Janes or Serenas or Sarahs, Harriets or Marys. When we get together, we're one family. Sing. We're different in the ways we choose. We're different in our jobs. We're different in the place we live with kids and cats and dogs. But with all our difference, it makes no significance. When we get together, we're one family. Sing with me. Oh, we're Archies. We are his family. Yes, we're Archies. Yes, we're Archies. Doesn't matter whether which mother or father or sister or brother. When we get together, we're one family. Thanks.
Many of you know Nancy Long Christensen. Many of us know her by Nancy Long, kind of like a pen name. But those of you who don't know her may realize that the mill at West Jordan may not even exist today if she hadn't preserved it. No.
I'm sure you're all aware that Archie had 48 children, and you're probably all aware that he built approximately 37 flour mills. Obviously, he was very, very busy. I had the opportunity to happen to drive down the road one day and come across his flour mill, and I was just drawn to it for some unknown reason. But anyway, briefly, real quick. The mill that I bought was built in at that site, Archibald built a flour mill in 1853 and ran that mill till 1877. And that mill the original mill was wood put together with wood dowels. It was disassembled, and he and his brother Robert took it to Fairfield and reassembled it down there and started a mill down there. At the same site, he built a bigger and better and larger mill, which is the mill that exists now, on a solid rock foundation of granite, which the day that I discovered the mill, I'll still never forget when my little boy went down and found a hidden room down there. But the mill, to me, is one of the greatest treasures in Utah. My dear sweet husband worked 2 years, and it's on the National Historical Register of Places, which isn't easy. We did win the award in Utah for the best restoration of a commercial building in the state 2 years ago. We're very proud of our hard work. I feel like maybe I need 11 husbands. However, I have a husband I call Hunk, and he's Norwegian. He probably knew Serena one day, or his family did, who knows. And he's been incredibly wonderful. The things that I can't do, he did, and vice versa. But I'd like to invite you all to come see this beautiful mill that your grandfather, great-great, and great-great-great-grandfather built. It isn't just a flour mill. It has something in there that inspires me. And I didn't even know who Archibald Gardner was. I was starving to death, freezing to death. I wore long-handled underwear. It sounds like the olden days, but it isn't. This is 1983. People would come in and to shop, and they'd say, "Oh, it's so cold in here, I'm freezing to death." And I'd say, "Well, this is just like the olden days. That's why it's like this." Really, I couldn't afford any heat. The rain was pouring through the roof on the tables upstairs because I couldn't afford to fix the roof. Customers would come down and say, "There's water on the tables upstairs." And I'd say, "I know." And they say, "You know?" Well, that's the way it was. And it's taken many, many, many years to get it where it is today. We're very proud of it. The woodwork inside and the wheels that Archie had built are just incredible. Any woodworkers here, you just stand in awe when you look in the ceiling. Now, we left all the wheels are in. And something was driving me to build a village. And day after day, gardeners started coming in. I still remember the first gardener, I noticed I was busy trying to make a living, so different gardeners would walk up to me and they'd say, as they bought a little purchase or something, they'd say, "I'm a gardener." And I'd think, "Well, gee, I'm a seamstress." I mean, I'd look at them and I was really busy, so I didn't. So funny, a lady came from California one day. She's probably here. She said, "I heard you have gardener things that you'll sell. Like there's a brick that says Gardner on it." And I said, "Why would you want a brick with Gardner on it?" And she says, "Because my great-great-grandfather built this mill." And I said, "He did?" And then I said, "Well, no." And I got thinking about it before I was too busy to even do any research. Now, believe me, if you want to know anything about Archibald, just ask. I have a chart that goes from 1830 all the way down, the wives, the marriages, the 37 years he was bishop, when he became bishop, when he built the Rock Church, blah, 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 blah. And the greatest thing I think that's so fun right now is I moved a little log cabin in from Clover, Utah. I'm a house mover. Anyway, and it'll be a private Gardner museum. Your museum. There's a lot of museums in Utah, like Brigham Young, but they're sharing with everything. This is just Archibald Gardner Museum. And I want to thank all the gardeners that helped me. And God bless Elva Gardner-Goff that's passed on. She's taught me so much. And I have 102 Gardner artifacts that'll be in the cases. They'll all be glass cases. We've had pictures done of every wife in color. I had Archie done an oil portrait. And now I'm building a village called the Gardner Historic Village. And we appreciate everybody that bought a T-shirt today because that's going to help pay for the museum. Thank you so much for your support and your beautiful, dear family. And by the way, maybe I love you because I see what Archie did. I have never met a mean or an ornery or a rude gardener, ever. You've all been so sweet. Something's in the genes, and believe it or not, I had one cousin in my whole life and one aunt. I don't have any family, so I love you all. Thank you.
Stay right here. You want to go now? Now, can we let someone who only has one cousin and one aunt and has done so much for the Gardner name to preserve not only the name, but the artifacts and the mill? I've seen it. It's beautiful. We can't let her go just with a small family like that. She's got her own children, but Archibald's got over 20,000 descendants. Don't you think we ought to share that with Nancy? Here we have a certificate of honorary adoption. Nancy did not know about this till she came up here, and somehow she got hold of a program. This certifies that Nancy Long Christensen is hereby honorarily adopted into the Gardner clan in recognition of her dedicated commitment to building the Gardner name, her restoration of the Archibald Gardner West Jordan Mill, her many hours of researching Gardner history, her gathering of many wonderful Gardner artifacts, pictures and documents, her building of the Gardner Museum, Village, and Restaurant, and for helping all of us to be proud of the Archibald Gardner name. And it's signed by representatives of the Archibald Gardner family, and we've selected people that Nancy knows to sign this. We could have selected any one of hundreds. I've put my name on there. I've worked with Nancy for about 2 years, and it's her inspiration that's helped me do what we've done here today. Archibald Gardner Widdowson, who is Archibald Gardner that you met this morning, Kim C. Gardner, who is going to help us with future Gardner projects, Milford Gardner, Donald Gardner, and Delilah Abbott, who is a good friend of Nancy and who wrote the book Days of Our Fathers. So Nancy, you now have 20,000 relatives. You want to respond?
Delilah, remember Fanny, the Indian girl that was adopted? She's my sister, too. And I might mention, I honestly do nothing of this. There were a couple people this morning that said, we're going to adopt you. And I was just so busy with the T-shirts and everything. And then we were standing there together at the picture, and Betty, I can't even think, Betty, my dear friend, anyway, she poked me, she says, congratulations on getting adopted. And I said, what? And then I went in the trailer, and I just sat in there and cried, but thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You're beautiful, you're wonderful. Be honest, just like Archie, and hard working. Work is the secret of happiness. Keeps kids off the streets from popping hubcaps.
Now, I'll share a couple of secrets with you. One time when I was at Nancy's mill, going over pictures and getting history, I heard her say under her breath, I wish I was a gardener. And I don't blame her for that. And so often people say, well, are you a gardener? Nancy, no longer do you have to tell them no. You are part of the Gardner clan. We'll bring our program to a close. We appreciate all of you being here so much. We thank those who have come from about 44 states, 3 countries. Let's see, there are people here from Africa. What are the other 2 countries? England? India. There's some people here from India, and they've come from this reunion. Any other? Denmark? Some here from Denmark? Great. We will close with 2 songs from Serena Koenig, who is a professional singer from New York and who is part of the Gardner descendancy. She comes from Serena Garson Evenson. She'll be accompanied by Deanne Vanderford. And in the future, we hope to have another Archibald Gardner reunion, but in the meantime, we are going to carry on with future Archibald Gardner projects. We mentioned the one this morning, the restoration of the Salt Lake City Cemetery, and we will still be willing to accept contributions to see that that's completed. God bless you. Honor your Gardner name and your Gardner heritage, and help us keep it current by sending in your records. Thanks a million.
Yeah, I'll just take it.
Maxwell breeze are bonny, where early falls the dew, and 'twas there that Annie Laurie gave me her promise true. Give me her promise true, which never God shall be, and for bonny Annie Laurie I'd lay me doon and dee. Her brow is like the snowdrift, her throat is like the swan, her face it is the fairest that e'er the sun shone on. That ere the sun shone on, and dark blue is her ray, and for bonny Annie Larry, I'd lay me down and die, like the dew on the garden lying, is the fall of her fairy feet, like winds in summer sighing, her voice is low and sweet, her voice is low and sweet, and she's all the world to me, and for bonny Annie Larry, I'd lay me down and die.
Thank you.
Woods and the waters in his hand, he's got the sun and the moon right in his hand, he's got the whole world in his hand. He's got the birds and the bees right in his hand, he's got the birds and the bees right in his hand, he's got the beasts of the field right in his hand, he's got the whole world in his hand. He's got you and me right in his hand. He's got you and me right in his hand. He's got everybody in his hand. He's got the heaven in his hand. He's got the
Beautiful.